I'd like to recognise the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present.
There is a common thing, and the common is that because the standard of life is going up, we are running short of the resources. That's why we should go for the reforms. So this is one thing which is common everywhere. And with this theoretical framework, the actions which invariably takes place, whether it is water sector, whether it is power sector, we have seen that first of all there is a change in the government policy, change in the government thought, which gets translated into the change in the statutes, the governing laws. We move to the corporatization and disinvestment of the government stake in the entities which are doing this, which are providing the services.
Corporations to become truly powerful. Their focus is money, it's about profit, it's about delivering a good dividend to their investors. And we're seeing more multinationals with an interest in winning these lucrative these lucrative public service contracts.
The area which develops what is known as regulatory chill. It allows companies to be raised to a level where they can sue our governments for making a change in the public interest. Probably the most well-known example is when Metclad, a United States company, sued the Mexican state government because Mexico decided the environmental pollution from Metclad's production exceeded their environmental regulation. $300 million later, Mexico has had to pay out. That's quite a dramatic amount of money, and you can see why governments, when they're threatened, go into a regulatory chill.
Whilst these multinationals have been doing okay, the people working for them haven't. No longer can a young person go into a low-skilled and part-time job with the goal of becoming the CEO of that company. Their situation as precarious employees is simply not stable enough to provide one with a solid platform to develop the necessary skills.
Because insecure work impacts on living standards and on people's sense of being excluded from society.
I want to introduce you to Carolina. And Carolina works in the Wellington Regional Hospital in New Zealand, and she's a young worker. She's on the union negotiated pay of $14.62, and she's pretty happy that she has a job. She understands that in times of recession, she really is at the end of the employment queue, and she struggled to find work. She's realising the issues that face her in her work. Low pay. She's got health and safety issues within the work. She faces issues of insecure work right across the community. They face a lack of respect.
Our experience in Western Australia in dealing with the push by private companies into our corrective services system in the 1990s. They believed in small government and looked to provide to private enterprise to provide opportunities to them to contract to deliver public services. They've introduced a form of direct agreement between employer and employees that was able to disregard all entitlements the union had secured through collective bargaining. We continue to be barred from workplace visits, not able to get inside the prison. We often were not even allowed outside the prison gates or onto the property that surrounded the prison. And if we wanted to visit any members at the workplace, the new laws required that we identify each and every member that we wanted to visit, and we're only permitted to speak with them. So you can imagine there were not many people who were putting their hand up to be identified as a union member in that environment.
She isn't a union member, and this is a very important point. She doesn't understand the relevance of being a part of a trade union. At the end of the day, she was able to benefit from the union negotiated pay increase. And she really does fit into the perfect example of a precarious worker in New Zealand. That right across the world we are seeing a decline in the quality of work. Of course, as we've heard just before, we're seeing a shift from formalised, standardised employment arrangements, which our union movement is, as we probably would agree, is structured around these arrangements, to the ongoing casualisation of our workforce.
So we now had to adapt and change what we did. This was actually really quite new territory for us as a union. Meeting people in our homes and outside the workplace was practically unheard of until then. We had long operated on the basis that we would only advocate for workers who had joined the union. After all, the pay and conditions were set by the union's bargaining agenda. However, this was not going to be the case here. In fact, any known affiliation between the worker and the union would likely result in the dismissal of that worker. We were not a benefit, we were actually a threat. We had to think differently and go about our business differently. So we continued to meet with the several workers who we had struck up a bit of a relationship with, and we met again with them in their homes, or we met at cafes, or we met at pubs, or we met at parks. And in fact, the conversation events that we had with each worker was only known to a very limited number of people. We didn't tell each of the other workers that we're having conversations with another of their colleagues, and it was only known to a limited number of union staff. And we didn't require any of those workers to sign up to the union. But those conversations were important. Through those conversations, we learned what was important to workers, what issues they were concerned about. And whilst working in that way, in a quiet, persistent way, we were also campaigning to change the industrial laws. And our campaign ended up proving successful when...
Again, I go back to my earlier statements that the argument for privatisation is often that the market, because of competition, can produce better outcomes. Really what you see in the prison sector is an oligopoly of a few very, very large companies, and they're the only ones capable of doing it. And even in the event of something appalling like that occurring, they know they'll still be able to get work because there's no real competition.
Australian unions believe that economies and societies are not only fairer to their citizens, but also more economically resilient and efficient when they have an effective social safety net in place to provide support to the most vulnerable. This applies to developing as well as developed countries. Quality public services, good social and physical infrastructure, including childcare facilities, and fair fiscal policies are essential to ensure high levels of quality employment.
I've been defining the quality public services as a means to create more equitable societies, giving people more opportunities through the delivery of public services. But to do that, we also have to look at the income side. Where does the money come from to fund the education, the water, the healthcare, the sanitation, etc., etc. And therefore you can say the engagement from PSI and from the trade union movement is very much linked to this, that if we want to do a full campaign, we both have to look at how the services will be delivered, but also how the services will be financed. So therefore, I think it's quite obvious that we have a role to play in this global movement in the support of the financial transaction tax.
I believe that we, as trade unionists, that is the trade union movement, are the only ones. We are the only ones with the will, the organised power and the convictions to push back against these agendas.